The Fourth Doctor is an incarnation of the Doctor, the protagonist of the BBC science fiction television series Doctor Who. He was portrayed by Tom Baker for 7 consecutive seasons and remains the longest-lived incarnation of the Doctor in the show's on-screen history, counting both the classic and modern series. Further to this, he is considered to be the most recognisable and iconic incarnation of the Doctor both in the United Kingdom and internationally. Within the series narrative, the Doctor is a centuries-old Time Lord alien from the planet Gallifrey who travels in time and space in his TARDIS, frequently with companions. When the Doctor is critically injured, he can regenerate his body, changing his physical appearance and personality in the process. Baker portrays the fourth such incarnation, a whimsical and sometimes brooding individual whose enormous personal warmth is at times tempered by his capacity for righteous anger. His initial companion was intrepid journalist Sarah Jane Smith, who had travelled alongside him in his previous incarnation, and she is later joined by surgeon Harry Sullivan. His later companions included robotic dog K9, savage alien warrior Leela, female Time Lord Romana, alien aristocrat Nyssa, boy genius Adric and Australian flight attendant Tegan. Overview. The Fourth Doctor appeared in 172 episodes over a 7-year period, from 1974 to 1981. This makes him the longest-running on-screen Doctor of the series. He also appeared in the specials The Five Doctors and made his final appearance as the Doctor in the charity special Dimensions in Time. Tom Baker reappeared in the 50th anniversary special as a mysterious curator. This incarnation is generally regarded as the most recognizable of the Doctors and one of the most popular, especially in the United States. In polls conducted by Doctor Who magazine, Tom Baker has lost the Best Doctor category only 3 times, once to Sylvester McCoy in 1990, and twice to David Tennant in 2006 and 2009. The Fourth Doctor's eccentric style of dress and speech particularly his trademark long scarf and fondness for jelly babies made him an immediately recognizable figure and he quickly captivated the viewing public's imagination. Producer Philip Hinchcliffe has often stated that the Fourth Doctor's bohemian appearance and anti-establishment views appeal to older, college-age students. The Fourth Doctor's time enjoyed a significant boost in viewing figures, averaging between 8 to 10 million viewers in just his first year. By 1979, the figures averaged between 9 to 11 million, going as high as 16.1 million for the final episode of City of Death. There are also novels and audio plays featuring the Fourth Doctor. 2 early audio plays featuring Tom Baker voicing the Fourth Doctor date from Baker's television tenure as he had mainly declined to appear in any further audio plays since leaving the series. In 2009, however, it was announced that a new 5-part series would be produced by BBC Audio. Biography. After contracting radiation poisoning from the crystals of the planet Metabeliz 3, the Third Doctor makes his way back to Unit Headquarters, where the Time Lord Campo Rimpock aids him in regenerating. In his new incarnation, the Doctor is eager to leave Earth in favour of exploration, thus drawing back from continuous involvement with Unit. He has also grown tired of working for the Time Lords. Despite attempts to avoid them altogether, the Time Lords continue to send him on occasional missions, including an attempt to prevent the creation of the Daleks, during which he also meets Davros. The Doctor travels with journalist Sarah Jane Smith, whom he had befriended prior to his regeneration, and, for a time, with Unit Surgeon Lieutenant Harry Sullivan. After a battle with Zygons in Scotland, Harry decided that taking the train was safer than the TARDIS, which the Doctor and Sarah chose to try to make an appointment in London. Instead they ended up on the planet Zeta Minor, located at the far edge of the known universe. From this point on the Doctor and Sarah travelled alone. The Doctor's companionship with Sarah Jane came to an end when he received a telepathic summons to Gallifrey, as humans were not then allowed on the planet. The summons turns out to be part of a trap set by his enemy the Master. The renegade Time Lord has used up all his regenerations and has degenerated into little more than a withered skeletal husk. The Doctor is framed for the assassination of the President of the High Council of Time Lords and put on trial. In order to avoid execution, the Doctor invokes an obscure law and declares himself a candidate for the office, giving himself the time he needs to prove his innocence and expose the real culprit. This ultimately results in a climactic battle with the Master. The Doctor is seen to travel alone for the first time, returning to a planet he had visited centuries before. During his previous visit, he had accidentally imprinted his own mind on a human colony ship's powerful computer, Shonen, leaving it with multiple personalities. On his second visit, the Doctor is now remembered as an evil god by the descendants of the colonists, some of whom had become a warrior tribe called the Sevateam. After the Doctor cures the computer, one of the Sevateam, Leela, joins him on his travels. The Doctor brings the intelligent but uneducated Leela to many locales in human history, teaching her about science and her own species' past. In Victorian London, the pair encounters the magician Li Xianchang and his master, the self-styled Wen Chiang. Wen Chiang is revealed to be a time-jumping criminal from the Earth's distant future. Later, the Doctor and Leela visit the Bial Foundation Medical Center, where they acquire the robot dog K9. While K9 is malfunctioning, a time distortion leads the TARDIS back to contemporary rural England. While investigating the distortion, he and Leela are confronted by an ancient being that feeds on death from Time Lord history, called the Fendal. Eventually, the Doctor returns to Gallifrey and declares himself Lord President, based on the election held during his previous visit. This is in fact a ploy to reveal and defeat a Sontaran invasion plan. In the aftermath, Leela and K9 decide to remain on Gallifrey. The Doctor comforts himself by producing K9 Mark II. Shortly afterward, the powerful White Guardian assigns the Doctor the task of finding the 6 segments of the key to time, sending a young time lady named Romana to assist him. The two Gallifreyans travel to a variety of planets, encountering strange and unusual allies and enemies, gathering the 6 segments and defeat the equally powerful Black Guardian, who sought the key for himself. After the conclusion of the quest, Romana regenerates into a new form. In an effort to evade the Black Guardian, the Doctor installs a randomizer in the TARDIS so that not even the Black Guardian can anticipate where they go. Ironically, the first place the randomizer sends them is the home planet of the Daleks, Skaro. Perhaps because of this, the Doctor begins frequently overriding the machine, first traveling to Paris for a holiday, only to get caught up in an alien scheme to steal the Mona Lisa. He eventually discards the device altogether, remarking that he's fed up with not knowing where he's going. Shortly after this, the Fourth Doctor and Romana are projected outside the known universe and into a universe of negative coordinates, known as exospace. The TARDIS lands on a planet called Alzerius, where they are joined by a young prodigy named Adric. It's in E-space that the Doctor destroys the last of a race of giant vampires who had once threatened all life in his universe. Eventually, the Doctor and his 2 companions find themselves in a white void with no coordinates, a sort of membrane between the 2 universes. A way out soon forms, but Romana and K9 chose to remain behind to help free a race of enslaved creatures in E-space. The Doctor and Adric have only just made it back when they're asked to help the people of Traken from a creature known as Melka. On Traken, Adric and the Doctor are introduced to the aristocratic Nyssa of Traken. Both Nyssa and her father, Tremas, assist the Doctor in stopping Melka, who is in fact revealed to be another TARDIS that is controlled by the Master. The Master is narrowly defeated, but managed to take over Tremas' body, thus giving himself a new incarnation. The Doctor decides to travel to Earth to scan a real police box as part of a plan to repair the chameleon circuit, the shape-changing mechanism in the TARDIS. However, the Doctor soon spots a mysterious ghostly figure looking at him in the distance. He eventually confronts the figure, who warns him of future dangers. As the Doctor prepares to travel to the planet Logopolis to get the chameleon circuit fixed, Tegan Jovanka appears in the console room. The conduit between E-space and our own universe is revealed to be a charged vacuum emboîtment created by the mathematicians of Logopolis as part of a system to allow the universe to continue on past its point of heat death. Nyssa shows up, explaining that she was brought to Logopolis by the same figure that the Doctor encountered. Logopolis soon falls under the Master's control, but the stasis field he is generating ends up releasing entropy and eroding matter throughout the universe, threatening to destroy the entire universe. The Master agrees to help the Doctor stop the spread of entropy by adapting the Pharaoh's project radio telescope on Earth so that they are able to reopen the CVEs. However, when the Master tries to take control of it, the Doctor runs out under the upturned radio dish to sever the cable linking the Master to the CVEs. The Master makes the dish start rotating so that the Doctor will fall to his death. Before he falls, he manages to tear out the cable, only to leave his companions watching as he clings to the cable. As his grip begins to slip, he sees visions of all the enemies he's faced over the years, then falls. Adric, Nyssa, and Tegan gather around the mortally wounded Doctor and call out his name. The Doctor begins seeing visions of all his companions and even the Brigadier calling his name. He then looks up at the three of them and utters his last words, "It's the end, but the moment has been prepared for." He then motions to the white-clad figure of the Watcher, who begins approaching the Doctor. The Watcher, a manifestation of the Doctor's future incarnation, merges with the Doctor and triggers his regeneration. "He was the Doctor all the time," remarks Nyssa, as the three watch him transform into the Fifth Doctor. The Fourth Doctor appears again in the 20th anniversary special The Five Doctors. A renegade Time Lord attempts to pull the first 5 incarnations of the Doctor out of time, inadvertently trapping the Fourth Doctor in a time eddy from which they are later freed. The Fourth Doctor also had a small cameo at the beginning of Dimensions in Time, warning his 3rd, 5th, 6th and 7th incarnation to watch out for the Rani. Brief holographic clips of the Fourth Doctor appear in The Next Doctor, and The 11th Hour. In the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor, the Fourth Doctor appears again in clips as past and future incarnations come together to assist in the saving of Gallifrey. Tom Baker also appears in the final scene of the episode, as a mysterious elderly museum curator who appears right after the 11th Doctor remarks he would like to hold this job someday. He alludes to his resemblance to the Fourth Doctor by talking about revisiting old favourite faces and hints that he too might be or have been the Doctor. Personality. To an extent, the Fourth Doctor is one of the most unpredictable in terms of his emotional depth, slightly more distant and alien than his previous incarnations. Despite his obvious moments of whimsical charm, offbeat humour, permeated by his manic grin, the Fourth Doctor is more aloof and somber than his previous incarnations. He could become intensely brooding, serious and even callous. He also displays a darker edge to his personality, and in The Invasion of Time he seems to cruelly taunt and play with the Time Lords, after his emergency inauguration as president. He also has a strong moral code, such as when he faces the dilemma of whether to destroy the Daleks and stating that if he did, he would be no better himself than the Daleks. He is truly appalled at the actions of the pirate captain in the pirate planet and refuses to listen to Professor Trist's attempts to justify drug running in order to fund his scientific work, simply telling him to go away. At the same time, he is capable of moments of genuine warmth. In the Ark in Space, he salutes the human race's indomitability, and latter stories establish that Earth is his favorite planet. He is the first Doctor to refer to his companions as his best friends. To his companions, especially Sarah Jane Smith, he was protective and somewhat of a father figure. In stories, such as Pyramids of Mars, he is concerned that he is approaching middle age with almost melancholic weariness. He often contemplates his outsider status to both humanity and his Gallifreyan heritage, as he seems more inclined toward a solitary existence. In contrast to this outsider existence, he emphasizes that he found mankind to be his favorite species, as if he was scientifically studying it. He could also be furious with those he saw as stupid, frivolous, misguided or just plain evil. When taking charge, he could be considered authoritative to the point of controlling and egocentric. He generally maintained his distance from the Time Lords, remarking in the Pyramids of Mars that, while being from Gallifrey, he doesn't consider himself a Time Lord. He clearly resents that even after they had lifted his exile, they continued to beckon the Doctor whenever they deemed it necessary. Although like all his other incarnations, he preferred brain over brawn. He is a capable swordsman and fighter when needs dictate, following on from the martial expertise of his immediate predecessor. He improvises non-lethal weaponry when necessary, but was also not averse to more lethal weaponry as a necessity against both sentient and non-sentient beings, like the matter-destroying Domat gun or contemporary firearms. One of the Doctor's most significant relationships occurs during his 4th incarnation and is explored further in his 10th incarnation. His friendship with Sarah Jane Smith is implied to be deeper than the relationships he shared with other companions to that point. She is consequently still profoundly affected by their separation many years later in her personal timeline. The 4th Doctor also takes a liking to jelly babies. Appearance: imposingly tall, with eyes that seem to constantly boggle, a mass of curls for hair and prominently displayed teeth, the Doctor favors an outfit that usually consists of a shirt, waistcoat, cravat, trousers, a frock coat, a wide-brimmed hat and, most famously, his impractically long, multicolored scarf, which was apparently knitted for him by Madame Nostradamus. When it is damaged in the arc and space, the Doctor declares with regret that it's irreplaceable. According to Baker, the Doctor's scarf was the idea of costume designer James Acheson. Acheson, knowing little about knitting, procured large quantities of various colors of wool, and commissioned Begonia Pope, a friend of his, to create a colorful design. She proceeded to use all of the wool provided, resulting in the absurdly long, but iconic, accessory. Producer Philip Hinchcliffe had wardrobe create 3 distinct coats for Baker to wear depending on the type of story, the first being the reddish-brown blazer that he wore throughout all of his first season. The other 2 coats were dark brown and light gray. The wardrobe department also provided a brown wide-brimmed felt fedora. The rest was often picked from his own clothes. A wider, brighter-colored scarf debuted with Baker's 4th season and a light brown coat was introduced late in his 5th season. Baker also appeared in a one-off Sherlock Holmes-inspired costume in The Talons of Weng Chiang. According to both the creators of the show and Baker, the character's look was originally based on paintings and posters by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec of his friend, Aristide Bruant, a singer and nightclub owner whose trademark was a black cloak and long red scarf. Characteristics such as pockets that store an infinite amount of junk. His wild, curly hair. Overcoat. And the 4th Doctor's grinning, wide-eyed general appearance have many viewers, including DW historian David F. Chapman, making comparisons between him and comedian film star Harpo Marx. Other viewers have noted similarities between the 4th Doctor's clothing and the haird coat ensemble worn by Malcolm McDowell at the start of director Lindsay Anderson's film If, when John Nathan Turner became the show's producer in Baker's last year. The 4th Doctor was the first to sport an item of clothing adorned with gold question marks as a motif, in this case, above the points on his shirt collars. His overall costume was redesigned, changing the color focus from brown to red. Designer June Hudson later revealed in an interview that Nathan Turner had even given her permission to remove the scarf altogether if she wanted to. Hudson opted to keep the scarf, as it was such an iconic part of the character. The new outfit included a full-length burgundy overcoat and wide-brimmed fedora, a matching blazer and trousers, and a vest worn over a specially made white dress shirt. The new, redesigned scarf proved to be longer than any previous scarf Baker had worn. After just one story, the blazer was discarded and the hat was relegated to a hat and coat stand in the background. His boots returned by his 3rd story. Story style: the early stories of the 4th Doctor were characterized by a strong Gothic horror theme. The duo of writer-script editor Robert Holmes and producer Philip Hinchcliffe consciously tapped into horror icons like mummies and Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, and even transformation and various themes like alien abduction. In these stories, they were given a science fiction explanation, rather than the typical magic. The Hinchcliffe era is one of the most controversial in the classic series run. The increasing horror elements and depictions of violence attracted much criticism from Mary Whitehouse, who had previously attacked the Barry Letts era for serials like Terror of the Autons. The controversy led BBC Director General to apologise to Whitehouse for the ending of one episode of The Seeds of Doom. Hinchcliffe was moved on to police drama Target in 1977 at the conclusion of his third year. Graham Williams, who had been developing Target, was brought on to take over as producer for Baker's fourth season. Williams was given specific instructions to lighten the tone of the stories, thus playing to Baker's strengths. However, the first 3 stories had already been commissioned. Robert Holmes had agreed to stay on to edit them, but he ended up leaving after only doing the first 2, Horror of Fang Rock and The Invisible Enemy. The task of editing Image of the Fendal fell to his successor Anthony Reed. The season was only narrowly finished. With the cast and crew suffering from burnout and lack of resources, the season finale The Invasion of Time was completed largely by virtue of it having been written to make use of pre-existing sets, props, and costumes. For their second season, Williams and Reed had planned out an overarching storyline that would run through the whole of the season. With more editorial control, it was also decided that the writers would put more emphasis on elements of fantasy and humor. Holmes wrote the first story, The Rebels Operation, and the writing team of Bob Baker and Dave Martin handled what would be the final story of the season, The Armageddon Factor. Douglas Adams wrote the second story, The Pirate Planet, while another newcomer, David Fisher, wrote the third and fourth stories. Again, difficulties began to arise when the fifth story fell through. Robert Holmes consented to writing what would become The Power of Kroll. Williams' third and final year on the show is considered a high point in terms of ratings and stories for the entire series. However, it proved even more difficult for Williams behind the scenes, as he found Tom Baker increasingly hard to cope with. The most watched episode ever of Doctor Who was Part 4 of City of Death, which drew 16.1 million people. Douglas Adams became script editor, and his distinctive style can be seen in the dialogue and stories. For example, in Destiny of the Daleks, Adams included a scene of the Doctor trapped under a boulder that resembles a similar scene in the second series of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. His time as script editor was beset by problems. Adams often ended up having to greatly edit and even rewrite stories. Once again, facing burnout and lack of funds, Adams eventually agreed to write the final story Shudder. Production proved difficult and ended up being unfinished due to a strike at the BBC. Williams left the show, dissatisfied with having left on what he considered to be a low note. In season 18, John Nathan Turner became the series producer. He instituted a number of changes to the show, including toning down the humor and introducing more science fiction concepts. During the season, the Fourth Doctor became very much subdued and, on occasion, melancholy. Baker began the season in poor health, though he eventually recovered. Both the actor and the character seemed noticeably older and tired, due to Baker's gaunt appearance and graying hair. Baker had been finding the role harder and harder to maintain, and the previous season had been particularly draining on him. Many of this season's stories also had an elegiac tone, with entropy and decay being a recurring theme. New script editor Christopher Bide-Mead found himself faced with a serious problem from the outset of his time on the show. He ultimately deemed many of the stories left to him by Adams to be unusable, being too close to the humor-driven stories of the previous season. The only one he ended up using was The Leisure Hive, though only after heavily editing it. Bide-Mead asked a pair of writing friends to come up with what would be the second story of the season, Meglos, which ended up being regarded as one of the weakest shows in the series' history up to that point. Bide-Mead only began to gain some momentum by the fifth story, Warrior's Gate. The story is notable for the Doctor's somber mood and seeming death wish, as well as the surprisingly adult nature of the story. The surreal, even dreamlike elements, such as time shifts and walking through mirrors, also earned the story some distinction. At John Nathan Turner's insistence, the Master was brought back. This was accomplished by Bide-Mead changing the villain in The Keeper of Traken into the Master. The overarching theme of decay reaches its conclusion in Baker's final story Logopolis, which Bide-Mead personally wrote. The story is particularly somber, even grim at times. Themes of decay and death are constant in the story, personified in the Ghostly Watcher, effectively a harbinger of the Fourth Doctor's death. The Fourth Doctor's stories saw fewer recurring enemies than in previous eras. The Daleks only appeared twice and the Cybermen only had one story, Revenge of the Cybermen. Unit, which had featured in most of the Third Doctor's adventures, only appeared in 4 early Fourth Doctor stories, playing a minor role in its last appearance, Season 13's The Seeds of Doom, in which none of the regular unit staff appeared. At the same time, stories such as The Deadly Assassin established most of the mythology surrounding the Time Lords and the Doctor's home planet Gallifrey, and that would remain a key feature for the rest of the classic series and still be felt in the revived series. For example, it is established that Time Lords only have a limited number of regenerations, which is a driving plot point in the stories Mordrin Undead, The Five Doctors, The Trial of a Time Lord, the 1996 television movie and the 2013 Christmas special The Time of the Doctor. Other mentions, visions of the Fourth Doctor appear in Earthshock, Mordrin Undead, Resurrection of the Daleks, The Next Doctor, The 11th Hour, The Lodger, and Nightmare in Silver, and his voice is used in The Almost People. The Fourth Doctor also appears in Sarah Jane's flashback in The Mad Woman in the Attic, via footage taken from The Hand of Fear. Similar flashbacks appear in the Sarah Jane Adventures story Death of the Doctor. In The Name of the Doctor, he is seen briefly by Clara Oswald wandering around the TARDIS. He was also seen as an echo running past Clara inside the 11th Doctor's time stream in the end of The Name of the Doctor. International reception, for audiences in the United States, who saw the show only in syndication, Tom Baker was the incarnation of the Doctor who is the best known, since his episodes were the ones most frequently broadcast stateside. These Time Life distributed stories added narration by Howard Da Silva at the beginning and end of each episode. Other appearances, spoofs. The Fourth Doctor's distinctive appearance and manner have made him a target for affectionate parody. The character has appeared several times on The Simpsons and twice on Robot Chicken. He also had a cameo on Futurama emerging from the stomach of a space whale, and another episode, where he is briefly seen running into the TARDIS. In the computer game Hugo 2, Whodunit? The player can save the Fourth Doctor from a Dalek in return for his sonic screwdriver. He is frequently impersonated by impressionist John Culshaw on the radio and television series Dead Ringers, who also voiced the Doctor for the Big Finish audio The Kingmaker. Archival footage of the Fourth Doctor's first title sequence was used in the Family Guy episode Blue Harvest to parody Star Wars hyperspace. In American Dad! Some Hovians were shown, with several of them dressed as the Fourth Doctor. As the narrator of Little Britain, Tom Baker has himself alluded to Doctor Who. In the 24th episode of the series' epic rap battles of history, the 10th Doctor is in a rap battle with Doc Brown from Back to the Future when he is shot by a Dalek and regenerates into the Fourth Doctor. Advertising. In 1980, Tom Baker played the Fourth Doctor in a series of television commercials for Prime Computers. In 1997, Baker reprised the role once again in a spot for New Zealand's National Superannuation Insurance Company. Argo Records audio drama, Doctor Who and the Pescatons, BBC audio dramas, Exploration Earth, The Time Machine, Hornet's Nest, Demon Quest, Serpent Crest. Tom Baker also recorded narration, in character as the Fourth Doctor, for a 1976 audio release of Genesis of the Daleks, which was subsequently reissued by the BBC on cassette and CD as a radio drama. Baker returned again to Doctor Who for the 1990s audio cassette releases of Lost Doctor Who stories. For some of these stories, he is in character as the Doctor. For others, he merely provides descriptive narration. Big Finish audio dramas, The Kingmaker, The Beautiful People, The Catalyst, Empathy Games, Stealers from Safe, The Perilous Effect, The Time Vampire, The Invasion of East Space, Feral's Folly, Tales from the Vault, Destination Nerva, The Renaissance Man, The Wrath of the Iceni, Energy of the Daleks, Trail of the White Worm, The Asidon Adventure, The Foe from the Future, The Valley of Death, The Child, The Antimatter, The Sands of Life, War Against the Larn, The Justice of Jalgzor, Phantoms of the Deep, The Dalek Contract, The Final Phase, Destiny of the Doctor, Babelsphere, The Light at the End, Short Trips Audios, Death Dealer, Chain Reaction, 7 to 1, The Wondrous Box, The Old Rogue, audiobooks, Glass, Old Flames, novels, Virgin New Adventures, Tamuim, Genesis by John Peel, Tamuim, Revelation by Paul Cornell, Virgin Missing Adventures, Evolution by John Peel, The Romance of Crime by Gareth Roberts, System Shock by Justin Richards, Managra by Stephen Marley, The English Way of Death by Gareth Roberts, The Shadow of Weng Chiang by David A. McEntee, A Device of Death by Christopher Bullis, The Well-Mannered War by Gareth Roberts, Past Doctor Adventures, Eye of Heaven by Jim Mortimore, Last Man Running by Chris Boucher, Millennium Shock by Justin Richards, Corpse Marker by Chris Boucher, Tomb of Vorma by Simon Messingham, Heart of TARDIS by Dave Stone, Festival of Death by Jonathan Morris, Asylum by Peter Darvell Evans, Science Fiction by Chris Boucher, Drift by Simon A. Ford, Wolfsbane by Jacqueline Rayner, Match of the Day by Chris Boucher, Doctor Who, Shada the Lost Adventure by Douglas Adams by Gareth Roberts, Eighth Doctor Adventures, The Eight Doctors by Terence Dix, Scene in the TARDIS Mirror in Camera Obscura, Tilo's Doctor Who Novellas, Ghost Ship by Keith Topping, Penguin 50th Anniversary. E-book novellas, The Roots of Evil by Philip Reeve, Comics, TV comic, Deathflower, Return of the Daleks, The Wreckers, The Emperor's Spy, The Sinister Sea, The Space Ghost, The Dalek Revenge, Virus, Treasure Trail, Hubert's Folly, Counter-Rotation, Mind Snatch, The Hoaxers, The Mutant Strain, Double Trouble, Dredger, The False Planet, The Fire Feeders, Kling Dynasty, The Orb, The Mutants, The Devil's Mouth, The Aqua City, The Snow Devils, The Space Garden, The Eerie Manor, Guardian of the Tomb, The Image Makers, TV Comic Annual, Woodland Warrior, The Tansbury Experiment, Jackals of Space, TV Comic Specials, The Sky Warriors. Doctor Who Magazine, Black Destiny, Victims, The Iron Legion, City of the Damned, K9's Finest Hour, Time Slip, The Star Beast, The Dogs of Doom, The Time Witch, Dragon's Claw, The Collector, Dreamers of Death, The Life Bringer, War of the Words, Spider God, The Deal, and Of the Line, The Free Fall Warriors, Junkyard Demons, Neutron Knights, Doctor Who Magazine Specials, The Naked Flame, Rest and Recreation, The Seventh Segment, Starbeast 2, Junkyard Demons 2, IDW Series, The Forgotten, The Time Machination, Star Trek, The Next Generation Doctor Who, Assimilation 2, Prisoners of Time, Video Games, Dalek Attack, Destiny of the Doctors, see also. Doctor Who and the Daleks in the Seven Keys to Doomsday, a stage play that opened 2 weeks before Baker began his tenure as the Doctor. In the play, Trevor Martin plays an alternate version of the Fourth Doctor. References. External links, Fourth Doctor on TARDIS Data Core, an external wiki, The Fourth Doctor on the BBC's Doctor Who website, Fourth Doctor Gallery, Fourth Doctor's theme music, Fourth Doctor title sequence.